This is Torah in the courts of heaven, and today's Torah portion is Miketz, which means at the end. And it's interesting because this will be the time when Joseph will recognize his brothers and they don't recognize him. But it's coming to the end of that period, which is very interesting because, as we know, Joseph is actually a shadow and type of Yeshua, of Jesus. And just as when Jesus was on the earth, when Yeshua was on the earth, his own people, for the most part, didn't recognize that he was the Messiah. And they refused him and denied him. And it's the same, this is the picture here that we're getting from Genesis chapter 42, where Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them. And he pauses and he says to them, "You are spies. You have come here to see the nakedness of the land." So already what's happening is Joseph is beginning to enact a plan to see where his brothers were. Obviously they're right in front of him. But what I mean is to see where their hearts were. Had their hearts changed from that hatred that they had toward him many years before? Were they sorry that they had done to him what they had done, believing that they had killed him or that he would die, and yet here he lives? We continue in chapter 42, Genesis 42:13, and they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." So you see here, it indicates that they didn't think that Joseph was alive anymore. Then we skip to verse 15. "In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here." So now, when the brothers were alone, in Genesis chapter 42 and verse 21, they said to one another, "We are truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us." So you see, they're thinking back. They believe they're alone, that Joseph has left, and he's told them this information that they cannot come back, they cannot see him again until they bring their youngest brother, which of course is Benjamin. And they won't see him until they do that. And so now they're very much in fret because they know that's going to be a very big hardship to get Jacob to release Benjamin to come to Egypt. So they're talking here, and of course you can see that now they're feeling guilt for what they had done to Joseph many years before. And that guilt is what we're needing to focus on. We need to think about the guilt that they're having, because it's a picture for us, for the guilt that many of us carry. And, we should have guilt for some of the things that we've done, but we shouldn't keep the guilt. We should have felt guilt from when we did the wrong things, but there's a remedy to the guilt. So in verse 22, it says, "And Reuben answered them and saying, Did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen." So he's talking to all of his brothers, and he says, "I told you, we shouldn't do this thing that you want to do. And so, therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us." So there's the shame. So you see, we find in verse 42:21, the guilt that the brothers had. And now in verse 22, we see the shame. And that's important for us because of the guilt and shame many of us feel, rightly so, for what we might have done in our life. So now we're going to go to chapter 43, and we could say this is after the return with Benjamin. So in verse 25 of chapter 43, "Then they, Joseph's brothers, made the present ready for Joseph concerning at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there." So Jacob, before they left and went back to Egypt, Jacob had told them to take this assistant of Pharaoh a present. And so they had a present. They had all these things. And so here they are just preparing this present to meet Joseph. And you have to really think about this and consider what's going on here. The fact that these brothers, who basically were nobodies from a whole nother country, coming and standing in the second of command of all of Egypt, that's a big deal. But we know why they were able to do it, because God's working in this scene, and because, of course, Joseph was their brother. And there's about to be this incredible reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers. So, in Genesis chapter 43 and verse 33, it says, "And they set before him the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And then the men looked in astonishment at one another." Because what happened here is Joseph had them set in their birth order. So they couldn't understand how he could have done that. How could he have figured that out? Or was it just some great coincidence? Well, of course it was no coincidence. We know, of course, that Joseph knew his brothers, and he knew the order of what they were born, of course. So Joseph dealing with his brothers before he revealed himself is exactly what Yeshua is doing now. This is an incredible picture, because the way Joseph tested his brothers, asking them certain questions, having them to do certain things, as in going back to Canaan and bringing back the youngest brother, doing these things was causing them to show who they really were and to show where their heart really was. And you see, that's exactly what Yeshua is doing on the earth right now. He's basically tightening the screws, is how I like to say it, on the whole earth. The Lord says it in the Bible like this: the whole earth is being shaken. We are living now in the days of the whole earth being shaken. And it's no surprise. We've been told this. If we're believers, we've been told by His Word that this day would come. And now it's here. And it's interesting because, there has been centuries, generation after generation, of people on this earth with this understanding that one day the whole earth was going to have this unraveling, this shaking before Yeshua comes. These birth pains, you could say. And so not only do they affect the whole world, they specifically affect the Jewish people and start to cause them to wonder what in the world is going on. Because you have to understand, there are many Jewish people that claim they don't even believe in God. There's been so many things that has been blamed on God that many people have turned against Him. And some people even say they don't believe. I tend to think and believe that there are no such thing as atheists. They may claim they're atheists, but in reality, they just refuse to believe God, because they really do deep down know there is a God. The point is, they simply don't want to serve Him or follow Him. They want to be the king of their own life. And you see, that's the point of this shaking on the earth right now, this tightening of the screws, is because the time is coming where there's nowhere to turn. So you're going to run right into the arms of the Lord, because you don't know what else to do. So in chapter 44 and verse 4, when they had gone out of the city and were not far off, Joseph said to his steward, "Get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my Lord drinks, and which he indeed practices divination?'" And that word divination. So basically, Joseph has had his steward of his home, to put this cup, this important cup, in the satchel of Benjamin, and then let them go a little far down the road, and then go back to them and find this cup, and they wouldn't even know they had it, but it would make them think that Benjamin stole it. And so now they're going to be in this incredible fear because they've, think that Benjamin's taken this cup from the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. But this cup, this divination, that word divination, it does mean to practice witchcraft on one hand, and magic and those spells, but it's not only that. And this is what I believe where the meaning comes for Joseph saying that it was his cup of divination. It means to learn by experience or to diligently observe. And isn't this what Joseph has been doing? He has been carefully watching the behavior of his brothers. And he has already learned by the experience of them dropping him in a hole and then later being sold into a caravan. And thank God he survived. And now he's elevated, that's past stories, to the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. But yet here his brothers are in front of him and don't even know it's him. And they think they're about to be repaid for the wrong that they had done to their brother so many years ago. So in chapter 44, verse 12, so he searched. He began with the oldest and he left off with the youngest. And the cup, as I've already said, was found in Benjamin's sack. So we go to verse 17. It says, the man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. Now this is Joseph saying this. And he says, as for you, go in peace to your father. So they had the cup. And what does the cup represent? So basically, now the plan has been sprung. The cup has been placed in Benjamin's sack unknowingly to any of the brothers, including Benjamin himself. The steward goes and finds Benjamin with the cup. So now they believe that he's stole it. They believe he stole it, but Joseph knows he didn't steal it because he had it placed there. So now they're going to come and Joseph's going to really spring the trap on them. But it's going to be for a really wonderful thing. But first, what might this cup represent? Well, the cup, of course, would be a cup of trembling. And the Bible speaks about a cup of trembling, a cup of reeling, which is going to come on the whole earth. We're right at the precipice of this happening. Also, this cup would represent guilt because they would look at this cup and they would go, oh my goodness, Joseph stole. But even more than that, they would realize that this cup represented the guilt that they still had for what they had done to Joseph so many years ago. It also represents the shame that went with it as well. But interestingly enough, finally, this cup represents communion. Yes, communion. How amazing that this cup could represent communion. But it does. So, they had the cup as it was given to them, but they had not actually received the cup. So you see, they had it, but they didn't receive it. This is interesting because even to this day, the Jewish people recite the blessing over the cup of the wine. Every week on Shabbat in the synagogue, the blessing is recited over the cup. And yet, there is no communion with Yeshua. And that's the place where we enter into relationship with God, is through Yeshua, through the blood that he shed. The blood covenant is through Yeshua's shed blood, not through the blood of animals. It says in the Torah that it takes the shedding of blood. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. But then God also says, but the shedding of animals' blood does not take away sins. It's interesting. So Joseph was dealing with his brothers before he showed them who he was. And again, as I say, this is exactly what Yeshua is doing now. So this cup was causing them to reveal who they were. So it's interesting because in essence, the cup kind of is, it's kind of becoming a cup of revealing because the cup, them having this cup and what the cup represented was causing them to unravel. So now, right now, in this world, right now, we are in the period just before the cups begin for Israel. Zechariah 12:2. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the nations and all the people around, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and Jerusalem. So again, we see the cup of trembling, the guilt, the cup of shame, and it's represented at Hanukkah. It's represented in Romans in 70 AD. And finally, it will happen with the Antichrist. And that will be the last time that the Jewish people have trouble from the world, because the Lord is going to come at that point and rescue them. In Zechariah 12:10, I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me who they pierced. So think about this, especially if you're Jewish and you're not believing that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Messiah. Because here God is saying he's going to pour out, when this horrible time, which is, we're leading up to it at this moment, when this horrible time comes upon the earth, and we're all going to be involved, but God is going to pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace, and they will look upon him whom they pierced. Well, who could that possibly be who was pierced? Of course, it was Yeshua. He was pierced through his hands, through his feet, by the crown of thorns on his head, and by the whip marks on his back, and finally by the Roman spear in his side. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for their firstborn. This is the picture of communion, and they will have it. But for those who don't know him and will never know him, then we have Revelation 19:15. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nations, and he himself will rule over them with the rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of the Almighty God. And then also in Philippians 2:12, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. When you really know God, you will tremble in his presence. And it's not just something you grow out of, but you rather grow more and more into. Where are you? Consider all of God's wrath being poured out on Yeshua. So this is the amazing thing. And not only the fact that all of his wrath was poured out on him, but the fact that Yeshua drank the cup of guilt and he drank the cup of shame in our behalf. So we have, because of this, the cup of communion with him. 1 Corinthians 11:23, for I have received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Yeshua, on the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same manner, he also took the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. So there is a new covenant for everyone. The cup that was made available to us because of the death, the crucifixion, the burial in the grave, a new grave, and on the third day, the resurrection from the grave. We have salvation through the mighty name of Yeshua HaMashiach. What does the cup represent to you? Or what cup represents you?